morning, ladies and gentlemen. If there was any doubt of the reason why we're here, the applause set the tone. Please, another applause for Chief Keith Richards, OBE. This is going to be short and sweet. Huge apologies for the late start. Never Quite the Insider is a documentation of the familiarity and unique experience with Nigeria of Chief Keith Richards, OBE. There's a part of it that I really like. I'm going to read it very quickly. As a manager, it has not been that I wanted to become African, but I wanted to eschew that traditional expatriate point of separateness, to be truly engaged and to respect the position of the local stakeholders. If this means that to some work colleagues and even some expatriate friends, I have gone bush, so be it. So, Oyibo, Niger man, Keith Richards, another applause for him. Very, very quickly, let me call on this very interesting lady. She's here. Former editor of the now rested Next newspaper, co-creator of Straight Talk Interviewing Nigerians Decision Makers. She's currently a member of the judging panel of the Munro Ltd Center for Investigative Journalism. She also sits on the board of trustees of Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism and Promasidor Kill Awards. She's also a member of the Nigerian Guild of Editors. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to present Kadaria Ahmed to take the floor, please. And of course, all protocols duly observed.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you have to forgive me. I've never had the honor of chairing this sort of occasion. So actually, I'm not fully sure of what I'm supposed to do, but it is a pleasure and a privilege to be sitting on stage with Professor Soyinka, of course, as well as Chief Keith Richards. Keith is a good friend, and I first met Keith because I was hoping to put together a program the like of which had never been seen in Nigeria before. I wanted to do the Nigerian version of Hard Talk. And everybody I approached for support basically said to me, this sort of program is not going to work in this country because people in authority do not like being questioned. In the end, Keith Richards and Promasidor were the people who had confidence in my vision, and they supported the 2 years run that we had with Straight Talk, and that was really awesome. But we're here today to talk about his book, and it is my rare honor and privilege to chair this occasion. I won't say much, except that we will get an opportunity after Professor Soyinka has actually delivered his review to ask a few questions, and I'll come back to the audience as well to engage. So help me in welcoming once again the people on stage. Thank you.
Okay, Bankole Olayebi. He refused to sit up here, but now you're here. You're supposed to do an intro for Keith Richards, so let's welcome him as he comes up here.
Professor Soyinka, Keith Richards, and Kadaria. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely delighted to welcome you to this occasion. It's about Keith's book, Never Quite the Insider. Keith will be formally introduced in the course of the program, but I just want to say that as publishers, it's our great pleasure to be able to say that this book and Keith Richards are now on our list. As I said to Keith the other day, if I hadn't published this book, it most certainly would be top of my current reading list. But of course, I'm sure that you'd expect me to say that because I've published it. But seriously, for me as a publisher, and I consider myself also a passionate consumer of the written word, I have found my encounter with Keith Richards, Never Quite the Insider, immensely worth the effort. But you do not have to take my word for it. I would only ask you to pause for a moment or two to consider the profile of the gentleman who is going to review the book today. Now, whatever else you may think of him, you certainly cannot deny that he knows a thing or two about storytelling and how the written word works. I do not know that Wole Soyinka reviews books on a regular basis. So there must have been something he found in this, I believe, for him to agree or decide to review it. And like many of you in this audience, I'm quite eager to hear what he has to say about this book. But as I said earlier, as a publisher of this book, it's been an enormous privilege to be part of the process of getting the book published. This process started about 2.5 or so years ago. Keith, am I right? Yeah. Now, of course, we'd had an initial encounter with Keith. We'd published his first book in 2009, I believe, which was his collection of essays. So in a sense, it was easy. I always knew he wanted to document his experience about life in Nigeria and the corporate world and all of that. So when I saw the first part of the manuscript, I knew that this was what we wanted to publish. And so before long, he put the stuff together between Lagos, Ibadan, and London, and several boxes and boxes of photographs. And we got working. Now, of course, in the publishing process, there's always ups and downs, and there were inevitably several ups and downs. I mean, he would send an email, it would take me a while to respond, he would fly off and say, you know, are you taking this thing seriously, blah, 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 you know. But on the whole, it was quite a pleasant experience, a pleasure to do this book. And as you will see from reading the book, I hope you'll pick up a copy of the book or two. Keith's storytelling is incredible. Now, what he has tried to do here is document his life in the corporate world. Before we finally put the material to press, we took quite a look at it. I mean, Keith was, as if you know Keith, he doesn't mince his words, he doesn't pull his punches. And we found some of this stuff a bit too hot to handle. And we had to navigate, you know, that terrain. Fortunately, it was agreeable, and we pared it down to what you have today. But even what has been published is quite explosive. But I certainly do not have any regrets at all in saying that this has been a worthwhile addition to our list. But beyond the pleasure and satisfaction of publishing this book, it is our hope that others will be inspired to document their lives, their experiences in business, in politics, and what have you. It is my opinion, both as a publisher and a reader, that we need to write more books, publish more books in this country. We need to tell our story. We need to engage with each other and start a discussion or continue the discussion on why our nation is the way it is and how we must, you know, go forward and make progress. And so, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. It's my pleasure to call on Keith Richards.
Good morning, everybody. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. And I see a lot of familiar faces and faces of friends. So let me start by just saying thanks to everybody for all your support, because without a lot of the people here, I wouldn't be here. And of course, let me say thanks to Prof, Kadaria, and of course to Bankole. It's a very, very great pleasure to be able to have a conversation with someone like Professor Soyinka and compare notes on the experience with our publisher. Trust me, that makes me feel like I'm a professional writer or something like that. It's a very great pleasure. So I'm going to read one or two small extracts. The book broadly, it has a bit of introduction and explains how I came to be here, a little of my early engagement, and therefore touches on some of the history of Guinness in Nigeria, and then my time at John Holt, my time in Aba, and then at Guinness, and then it finishes then. So I'm just going to read a little bit, start off, about my experiences in Aba, and particularly, I don't think Oti's here, but it's one of Oti's favorite pieces that he always used to tell me that if I ever write a book, this has to be in it. And the background to it was, when I got to Aba, there was a security crisis. After 8:30 or night, the police did not go out. It was too dangerous for the police to go out. So the local, the market people, Alaba Market and the other markets in Aba, brought in Bakassi, the vigilante group. And they started okay, but after a while, they took over. Things took over a life of their own. The bodies on the side of the road on a Monday morning after their executions grew more numerous. And then the minority shareholders that we were fighting decided that they would hire Bakassi to try and intimidate us to hand over the business to them. So that's the background. So given the prominence of IEA, that was the company, and the turbulence of our own situation, it always seemed likely that sooner or later I would have the pleasure of dealing with this group of gentlemen. Normally, informal security would be delegated to a Nigerian manager, but in this case, at the insistence of Bakassi's leader in Aba, Como, it would be my responsibility to deal direct with him. Onwuke, that's the other shareholders, and his team had approached Bakassi to help throw us out of the factory, making all sorts of the usual allegations. However, even as lawless as a group as Bakassi would tend to think twice about attacking foreigners for fear of the additional exposure this might lead to. And I suspect too that Como quite fancied the idea of intimidating an Onocha personally, hence his insistence on a personal meeting. I was certainly not going to venture into his territory, and as they were usually active late in the day, I invited him to the house in the evening. Being very hospitable, I naturally invited him to have a drink and a seat. I remember well that his lieutenants were not allowed to sit or to drink, but stood behind him. Discipline, if that's what you would call it, was tight. Hot drink was duly offered and accepted, and we sat facing each other over the dining table in my living area as he placed his machete on the table. Funnily enough, I don't remember feeling his behavior as particularly aggressive. In fact, he appeared to be tired and slightly sluggish, probably weed-related, and his eyes were a bit red-rimmed. He was probably a bit nonplussed at being offered a drink and hadn't expected social pleasantries, and his exposure to expatriates would have been limited. He wasn't an exceptionally large man, but well-built, but his English was certainly reasonable. And I do remember thinking that this was a surreal moment and wondering how many people he had ordered killed, and indeed how many had died directly by his hand. But the evening was to become more surreal yet. Over several glasses of Johnny Walker Red, slugged rather than sipped, Como explained the situation. He had been offered payment by certain parties to work for them and chase us out. They had told him we were intimidating the workforce, stealing the equipment and running the company down. And we had to be stopped. So he had come to see for himself, as he was a serious businessman and couldn't accept a contract unless he knew it to be genuine. He can now see that this isn't obviously true, that the business is working, and I am a serious person, so he would consider working for us. Protection. However, I would obviously need to compensate him for turning down their contract. I responded that I appreciated his openness and professionalism and talked about how many jobs we were providing and how it was we, not the other party, who were doing the right thing. As a patriotic Nigerian, he should help us without demanding money because we were struggling, and if we failed, all those people would lose their jobs. The negotiation was on. Now, I am not a good negotiator, and Nigerians are the best, Abby. But I had Wingle Esumai, my trusted advisor, by my side, and we were able to break off from time to time and confer to buy time. The sums seemed fairly low, but we were hemorrhaging cash, paying security expenses, and there was the principle. He was stuck at 100,000 naira a month, and I was at 40,000 naira, and neither was moving. His tone darkened somewhat, though he stayed calm. He exclaimed that if I was not prepared to pay for their services, then he would be forced to work with the other side, and this would mean they would be able to take over the factory. With a little more menace in his voice, he said, in which case there was nothing I could do to stop him. All well and good, I responded, but you will have to step over my dead body. No problem, he replied calmly. To which I asked, do you know what happens to a black man if you step over a white man's dead body? He looked at me. You will never have issue again. At that moment, I was somewhere above myself, looking down and thinking, what the fuck? I had absolutely no idea where that came from, nor what made me say it. Most likely I was aware of the saying, Beke na wabara, excuse my pronunciation, which means the white man is a spirit. And Bakassi were very much known to believe in magic. So it was probably playing somewhere in the back of my mind. But anyway, it worked. Without any histrionics, Como paused and considered my comment. Within a few more minutes of discussion, we concluded at 50,000 naira a month for effectively what was his protection. After a few pleasantries and another glass of scotch, off they went, leaving me to ask myself if what had just happened was what I thought it was. So, thank you. So I ended up staying for a couple of years in enjoying the delights of Abba and Bakassi. And later when I joined Guinness, Como had become a politician. Who knows? Today he may be sitting in our National Assembly. It wouldn't surprise me at all. So I thought I'd read one more short excerpt, if you're all up for one more. So this one is about, actually, before I started at Guinness, but it's meant to explain something. So when I was offered the job at Guinness and I went back, one of the frequent comments I heard was, "I hope you're not going to drink the coffee." Now, that comment was quite frequent, and I'm going to read a short excerpt of why that came to be. But before I do, I'm just going to greet, because I saw somebody. There's somebody I just want to say hello to, because she very much is in this book. Sometimes you need good advisors and friends, and I was very fortunate to have a lot around me. But when I was at Guinness, I had one very special one. She was my PA, Toyin Adibambo, and I see you're there, Toyin. So, good morning. When I left Guinness, Toyin wrote me a beautiful letter, and in it she said something very wise. She said, "I will not be judged if I stay in Nigeria at my time at Guinness. I'll be judged about how I behave afterwards." And I thought that was a very, very wise thing. But the reason it's relevant is because when I did join Guinness, Toyin did not want to make my coffee. And I said, "No, those old stories are over with, and I want you to start making my coffee." But this is the story. And it goes back to the late 80s when IBB banned the importation of malt to conserve foreign exchange. Another decree that was damaging to the brewery industry, at least, was General Babangida's decree banning the import of malted barley. Up to that point, most states had their own brewery producing good local brews such as Champion, Trophy, Life, and Rock. Not that I would know, because as everyone here knows, I still only drink Guinness. Over 30 breweries provided strong local employment and revenue. But the upshot of that decree was that only Guinness and Heineken were able or prepared to invest in the R&D needed to develop drinkable beer out of local grains such as sorghum. So this delivered the two companies the golden opportunity to build dominance, so that by the mid-90s their joint share was approaching 90%, and they were the two of the most capitalized companies on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. There were only 4 or 5 other breweries still operating at all. But another bizarre indirect consequence of that decree was the later advice given to a new MD not to drink the coffee. When IBP's decree came out, the breweries had a short window to stock up on malt before the ban took effect. By this time, as a knock-on from the indigenization decree and rather lackadaisical management by the two foreign partners, Guinness had a Nigerian chief executive. Chief Abel Ubeku had risen up the ranks via the personnel function, as HR was called then, and was a colourful, opinionated man who was later to make an unsuccessful bid for the presidency, funded, as was alleged, the lawyers told me to put in words like that, as was alleged by the proceeds of his time at the helm of Guinness. The finance director was a man called Ben Aranyeka, who it later transpired had dangerous felonious contacts through his wife's criminal connections. The senior expatriate, a Guinness man, was the DMD, Archie Fairley. The major controversy of that period has not been authoritatively documented, though some facts were brought out in the local press at the time. Officially, Guinness have always refused to confirm the many rumours and stories, but certainly what transpired into Lagos folklore was an ever constant in the back of the mind of subsequent DMDs and MDs. As a result of the shortage of foreign exchange, the company was resorting to the use of middlemen who could find hard currency to import necessary materials. One of these was for hops, for which a long-term contract had been agreed with a local importer who had paid Ben Aranyeka £150,000 for the privilege, £150,000 for the privilege. Plus, as David Hampshire, my previous boss who corrected some of the facts in the book for me, plus, as David Hampshire noted, as Ben was a good Christian, another 10% for his church. Ultimately, the local purchase order turned out to be unnecessary and the contract was cancelled. The furious supplier came in to complain to Archie with a copy of the relevant checks as evidence. He explained exactly how much Ben and his church had been paid for the contract. Fairley knew this put him potentially in serious danger and rang David. This was on a Thursday, and in the dangerous assumption that no one was aware that he possessed this information, it was agreed David would fly out on the Monday. He subsequently called David again to tell him that as he'd been coming into the office, the gates had opened to allow a car to exit, and he had been able to enter without stopping. And this had obviously saved his life, as several shots were fired, but missed the car as it had driven straight in. Rumours were already circulating within Guinness, Nigeria, which had actually led to at least one ritual killing of an officer from the procurement department, presumably to silence him. The following day, Ben's wife Esther visited Archie at home. Apparently at social call, they had coffee. Evidently, at some point, Archie left the room to get something. That night, he fell seriously ill with a mysterious sickness. After a series of late-night calls between David and the Guinness Company doctor, a medical evacuation was arranged, and with the help of the British High Commission, Archie Fairley was flown home and treated. However, this was only after a serious scare when he started bleeding internally in the middle of the night, and were it not for decisive action by Guinness's contracted doctor, Bayo Adebayo, he would never have made the plane. Apparently, during that night, an Irish expat by the name of Tim Sheehan was holding vigil at Archie's bedside. Suddenly, his drip backed up red, and Tim realised his friend was hemorrhaging. He sent his driver, one Matthew, to drive to the doctor's house in nearby Maryland and point the car at his gate and keep flashing and sounding the horn until the doctor came with him. This was achieved, and Adebayo administered what he said was a one-off shot of some form of coagulant to stem the flow. If it wasn't enough, he would not be able to try another dose. Equally, too much would cause blood clotting. In any case, Fairley would not make the air ambulance. But it worked, and Archie Fairley survived to eventually take his Guinness pension and retire to Sussex. In the subsequent internal investigations, other scams were discovered, including a major one concerning the final malt imports before the ban took effect. Esther was reputedly involved in several, with or without her husband's connivance, and was eventually jailed for many crimes. She was running a gang involved in various rackets and was believed to have been responsible for several murders, including her husband's secretary at Guinness, with whom he was having an affair. Ben's driver was also killed, although this was believed to have been arranged by Ben because he knew too much about the malt fraud. Guinness in London and Lagos were anxious to downplay the drama, and the story was that Archie had food poisoning. Even though they did their best to dampen speculation and manage the PR impact, the local press had their own views. The most common theory was that the poison had been a berry used by local practitioners called a Calabar bean and had been administered through Archie's coffee. There was actually an attempt by Ben's supporters to put suspicion on the DMD's secretary to protect Esther. Whatever the truth, from then on, no senior expatriate ever allowed his coffee to be made by his secretary and always brought it in his or her own flask. In any event, no secretaries wanted to make their boss tea or coffee again, in case something happened and they became a suspect or were coerced into delivering an unwholesome potion. Once my appointment was announced some 12 years after this incident, the story was still known enough that "I hope you aren't going to drink the coffee" was a frequent comment. That and other incidents had left Guinness with a tainted reputation. And then I turned up and Toyin started making my coffee. And I'm still here. So, thank you much. Thank you for listening to a couple of chapters. And Koko, if anyone's there, could someone bring some water for the people on the top table, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If that doesn't excite you in getting a copy of the book, I don't know what else will. If you're just joining us, good morning. Thank you so much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for taking time out of your very busy schedule on a weekday to be here. Keith, these people love you. The place is full. When Keith asked me to do this, I didn't hesitate. He's a friend, a dear friend. I'm sure most people here, if not everyone, can say that they have a fond relationship with him. Human life has meaning only to that degree, and as long as it is lived in the service of humanity. Born in 1934 in Nigeria and educated in England, the playwright and political activist became the first African to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. His Nobel acceptance speech was dedicated to Nelson Mandela. He has published hundreds of works, including drama, novels, essays, poetry, and colleges all over the world seek him out as a visiting professor. In 1986, upon being awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, the committee said of the playwright, "In a wide cultural perspective and with poetic overtones, fashions the drama of existence." Also a political activist, he was arrested during the Nigerian Civil War in 1967 and held as a political prisoner for over 20 months until 1969. This experience is captured in his book, The Man Died, which is a record of his imprisonment. A tiger does not shout its tigritude, it acts. I welcome and present to you playwright, poet, author, political activist, teacher, hunter, and wine connoisseur, Professor Wole Soyinka.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome. One of my favorite poets, I had to plead with him. I said, please, I love your poetry, but when you read your own poems, you ruin those poems for me. Anytime you have to read your poems in public, please send for me wherever I am. I volunteer my services free of charge. But please stop ruining your own poetry by reading them yourself. Well, I cannot say the same for Keith. I didn't know he was such a dramatist. He's a powerful reader of his own stuff, and I'm sure other people's stuff. In fact, he told me earlier when we were over there that he actually had a walk-on part in which he had just one word to say. They needed an Oyinbo, and he fitted the bill, and all he had to do was just say one word. I'm going to get hold of those people and let them know that they wasted an opportunity. And the next time they should give him a part really worthy of his talent. He's a real marvelous performer. Now, first of all, some house cleaning. I think it's usually called housekeeping announcement. This one I'll call it, I think, ground cleaning announcements. This is going to take place. I warn all of you who invite me to events from here on, not just now, but it began some time ago, that before any event, before I play my role in any public event, there will always be this preliminary, the denunciation of something that goes mostly by social media, the fount origin of fake news. I don't care whether it's a wedding, a funeral, child naming ceremony, international concourse of philosophers, seers, prophets, church service, funerals, whatever it is, any opportunity which I have, I am going to denounce, and preferably with details of the latest atrocity committed by this thing, this abused, much abused medium, because it's really a positive medium, so I shouldn't really denigrate it. The abuse which is being inflicted on what is called the social network, the social media, whether in the form of blogs, tweet, competition with the President of the United States in that department especially, very rampant in this country, whether it's just Facebook even. The issue of identity abuse has become an issue for every individual, every organization, every community. I think we have reached a point where we must declare war on this phenomenon, which is just global, but which as usual, like all bad habits, seem to be centered on this nation. My example today is contained in this, is actually reproduced in this work. Please let's divert attention away from what we came to do, which is to present Keith Richards' book. But fortunately, it's the same publisher anyway, so I know he wouldn't mind, my publisher wouldn't mind. But at the same time, a book occasion is still a book occasion. It's a publication day. It's a literary event. And if we are performing such events in a context of literary abuse, the abuse of communication, identity, not merely identity theft, but identity abuse, we actually contribute to the success of the originating event by exposing and denouncing the latest atrocity by these samples, examples of human garbage who invest the social medium. In this particular instance, it's really gone beyond the limits of one's imagination. Not so long ago, for instance, I was in Chandigarh, faraway Chandigarh in India, where I was being honored, etc., etc. And the hospitality actually extended to the degree of my arriving in my bedroom and finding that the students had decorated the bed with slivers of palm leaves with which they had spelt out a quote from me in my honor. Yeah, it wasn't. I took a photograph of it. I was very touched, but it was not my quotation. Fortunately, it was one I could not only live with, I could even sleep with it. So it wasn't one of the really embarrassing ones. It was a sentiment which I happened to share in this particular instance, but it was not mine. Come even nearer home. And a few days, weeks ago, I got a report from people passing through the international airport. And there was a supposed quote of mine which was placed on a billboard by a reputable bank, in all sincerity. In fact, a bank with whom I interacted not so long ago on some Africa Day, and they had placed this billboard there with a quote supposed to be by me. So I wrote them, of course, because I was breathing fire. I'd already written my lawyers, told my usual enforcer team to stand by for direct action if necessary at the airport. But they were very genteel, and they wrote back, apologized, took it down immediately, thank goodness, and fortunately they supplied their source, which made things pretty grim. Because we then went to that source, we tracked down that source, and they had quoted it in all sincerity, because they believed that this source was authoritative. I think they couldn't imagine that anyone would set up a blog titled 40, or an item on their blog titled 40 Famous Quotes from Professor Wole Soyinka. And this quote, this blog, welcome to SB blog. I have a facsimile of it here, I have a photograph of it here. This blog apparently had been sitting there for years, and it claims to be a blog dedicated to education, to research, to job provision, etc., etc., etc. And so there it is, a supposed source of reliable information. Welcome to SB blog, news updates on education, sport, entertainment, articles and stories, politics, job tips, research, and lots more. 40 famous quotes. Out of 40, 27 were false, are false. Some of them containing quotes which I could never possibly utter in my existence, since these particular, the worst ones actually are very disrespectful of the female gender. And this has been sitting on internet for years, and people have been using this kind of page as a reliable source of information to the extent that it's actually taken out by a bank and used in advertisement. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're at war. And I don't care how long, how much of my time it takes. I don't care how casual or dilettantish organizations, what kind of attitude they take of indifference, thinking maybe it doesn't matter. For some of us, it does matter. And if it's a life and death struggle, then that is exactly what it's going to be. But the notion, especially for one like myself who's a writer, and to consider this word very, very carefully before setting them down, it is obscene and unacceptable that a bunch of people, individuals or whatever, can sit down and actually fabricate 40 quotes, allegedly from me, of which 27 are totally false. So there we are. Sorry to have taken up so much time, but this is going to be routine with me from here on, and I invite all those who've been similarly abused to join me in this warfare. Having said that, I have an apology to make. Well, not quite, but an apology just the same, an excuse. This is not being published today, I assure you. But there's an error, a serious error committed in this intervention series, from which I have just plucked out this lie, which contains, unfortunately, an error for which I take responsibility, but it's actually one of those, what they call printer's devil. And in these days of instant autocorrection, you find that once one error has been made, especially when effort is made to correct it, and a wrong correction is made, it proliferates throughout the whole. All of you who substitute, find this word, substitute, and something happened along the way. And so a name is here, which is wrong. It's falsely attributed. Fortunately, it's not attributed to any identifiable human being. So nobody has been slandered. However, the real addressee in here, the name is wrong. I'm not going to have my publisher do anything about it for the simple reason that it doesn't matter. It's the content, and nobody has been slandered, but it's a reality which has been addressed, etc., etc., etc. And anybody who wants it corrected personally, please post your book to me, and I will send it back with my personal apology, saying that this is what should be the real name, and that it's just an error, a combination of a modern technology which went haywire. So apologies from that, on those grounds, and if necessary, we can even stick an erratum there, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Then we'll talk about it later on. Okay? So now, never quite an insider. Memoirs of a Ghetto Blaster. We mostly see that peculiar species known as, before I continue, it's amazing, he picked on a passage, which in fact I cite in here. I'm getting worried about you, because many similarities begin to worry me. Anyway, we mostly see that peculiar species, the expatriate. We see them as they really are, or if you prefer, see them as they be. On festive occasions, a wedding, child naming ceremony, retirement party, chieftaincy conferment, funeral outing, simply on social occasions. I rely mostly, of course, on the testimony of media photos when they are tugged out in local traditional dress, registering varying degrees of adjustment, unease, discomfort, self-mockery and/or sense of duty, and capacity for endurance. At such occasions, you can see it written on their faces. You just wait until my pub mates in Shropshire see me in this costume. Actually, it's more likely to read, if you ever catch me again in this Agbada or Bavariga outfit, call me a so-and-so and so. You can virtually read on their faces images of that longed-for release when they can get back to some rational office clothing or after-hours tennis shorts at the club, nursing a cold beer or perhaps Guinness, since we are largely in Guinness territory here, going by the author's business and bibulant affiliations. In and out of their comfort zone, however, the word expatriate at once identifies and simultaneously alienates them in relation to their temporary or adopted home. Here is our own author's take on that defining sartorial infliction. I quote, "I harbor a suspicion that there's actually a subtle practical joke in the gift of local dress. He, that is the white recipient, will be told by his Nigerian friends that he looks fine. But there will be a snigger, there will be sniggers, mostly by his expat colleagues behind his back." As always in this book, mildly buried within that seemingly straightforward point of view or of the physical sartorial torture is a sociological barb. Here it comes. I quote, "The next practical joke by gift is the full agbada. This is the ubiquitous outfit worn by big men all over the West Coast. Traditionally, it consists of trousers with a cord at the waist, usually with a matching ankle-length long-sleeved shirt, but always topped up with the voluminous and free-flowing agbada itself." Are you sure it's ankle length? I think it's usually about this one. Yeah, get your facts right. Yeah. The whole point about the heavily embroidered and open-sided square of the Agbada is that it is highly impractical. This, here it comes, this is intentional, as big men are supposed to have practical things done for them, not by them. True or false? Well, we leave it at arguable. But that very comment stamps our author's narrative and analytical temper, which is candor, setting it down as perceived and as experienced. You can depend on Keith Richards not to miss a chance to put his colleagues, friends, antagonists, and environment on the spot, if not exactly through the ringer. Even within what appears to be a straightforward delineation of local color and neutral seeming data, there lurks the hidden sociological barb to wipe the complacent smile off the reader's face, dealing right and left, expatriate or local, without discrimination and without any pietistic concessions. Keith Richards does not subscribe to that doctrine that I often describe as one of moral flaccidity, known as political correctness. I find that refreshing. I suspect even over and above the engrossing content, in turn dramatic, hilarious, informative, etc., that defining attitude contributed, I suspect, largely to my accepting to play a role in the promotion of these memoirs. In any nation that is plagued by bloated collective ego, it is essential that the balloon of self-regarding be periodically lanced by the scalpel of outsider perception, especially where the lancet is cauterized in the flames of searing personal experience. And talking of personal experience, the other reasons, I think, which just made me absolutely quite happy and content to do a review or be involved in any way in this publication is the similarity, the paralleling of experience between Keith Richards and myself. Whether we're talking of my activities in Koja, my experience in Koja, as far back as Koja, the All Africa Games, which are, whose opening and closing ceremonies are organized, whether we're talking about Festac 77, whether we're talking about even my stint as chairman of the CBCIU, the Commission or Center for Black Civilization and International Understanding recently in Oshogbo, whether we're talking about Lagos at 50, the organization of that year-long event, which nearly, at which I think I also expended the second round of my 9 lives. No matter including my experience with the Road Safety Corps, which I inaugurated in this country, when I began reading Keith Richards' book, which is virtually non-stop, I found each episode virtually paralleled by my own experiences in the jungle of corruption, which has fastened on every single facet of Nigerian life. And so I think it was a feeling that, well, I don't have to even set pen to paper about this. All I have to do when people ask me, how did you do in this event? I'll say, turn to chapter this, page this, of Keith Richards' book, and you'll find exact replica of the kind of experiences which I understood. I think this was a major fact, major reason behind my very readily accepting to play a role in this. However, we must not abandon the theme of the expatriate persona just yet, as a study in its own right, and as a leitmotif of this no-holds-barred business odyssey, never quite an insider. That very title provokes a closer look at a condition that we tend to take for granted, albeit an ambiguity in itself. It presents in advance a creature in liminal existence who must, however, take himself or herself out of that limbo from which, paradoxically, he has to function. He has to get to know and to be known by people and forge strategies for professional productivity and sometimes even survival. This psychological fit of that title is the basis for all manner of interactions and decisions, and no matter the nature of the profession, from the pastoral and educational, to the technological, to the academic, to the commercial, it straddles the desk-bound and the gritty, hands-on, energy-intensive, and sometimes even dangerous enterprises. Hovering as an in-between often provides unusual insights, no matter how controversial. The expatriate mission, whatever it is to edge his way inside even when being left outside in the rain, to become a part of, a student of, entangled with his or her peopled field of operations, some evidently much deeper than others. And so in this case, we find ourselves in the business community, in the business of ministering to tastes that you and I sometimes flaunt as if we were born to them, or cultivated on our own, even before we had knowledge of the existence of such tastes. That, of course, is a fallacy. The business in this narrative explodes that illusion. So that business not merely fulfills, but fabricates taste. I find the process fascinating. We confidently discriminate between such acquired tastes. We pass judgment. We become connoisseurs. We become fierce partisans, even addicts of one brand or another of the same commodity, blithely unconscious of the wily processes and manipulative labor of outsiders, trying out variations, doing what they call customer survey or research, etc., etc. We remain totally unconscious or indifferent to the hard-headed decisions that go into such partisanship. The experimentations, rivalries, cutthroat, one-upmanship, and even espionage operations. We have been had. Take this speaker's word for it. After reading Keith Williams' book, even your favorite brand will never taste quite the innocent tipple it once was. I mean, it has become complicated by insider knowledge. Now, that does not mean that it will churn your stomach or enhance its flavor on your taste buds. It will simply have become far more interesting a commodity that only happens to be beer or stout, or whichever thirst quencher you indulge in. It applies equally to even soap. Creativity and imagination placed at the service of the commercial and mundane. When I was in secondary school, boarding school, we were usually given a weekly, or was it monthly, I can't remember, ration of certain essential commodities. These included a bar of soap. I recall that brand. It was Key Soap. It has always proved impossible for me to encounter that yellowish bar, either in its full-length glory or cut up into squares, even without its distinctive factory smell, without an evocation of the educational rites of passage through which I was put. Now, it has also taken on a vivid dimension of history, and a violent one at that. Pity, one cannot tackle all the issues in this multifaceted book, one that veers from the hilarious to severe, testing and challenging, throws one headlong into deadly zones of scheming, involves blackmail, backstabbing, opportunism, loyalties and betrayals. A compendium of total combat that includes fetish warfare, ethnic and micro-ethnic wars of narrowed interests. The world of presentation, packaging, and ruthless promotion that lie behind those suave boardroom manners take on a sinister aspect. I mean, some of us have been there, also on business, albeit of a different calling. Don't forget that there is that redeeming aspect of business, even of the seamiest kind, that is known as corporate social responsibility, the adoption of the good cause, etc., which is where you and I come in. So enter the impecunious artist or cash-strapped cultural impresario. Mind you, more than often, they find that soccer or similar high-exposure preoccupations have beaten them to that reception room. Still, there are always leavings here and there, and corporate responsibility appears to be willing to refine its catchment options all the time. Well, such entities, the cultural ones, had better get hold of Keith Williams' book if they truly mean to get serious and competitive. You have to understand the nature of the rocky terrain from which you are attempting to extract moisture. Not that the author indicates any intention of educating us, the practitioners of fine bara, but wittingly or unwittingly, this work opens up insights into corporate psychology, of which I wish I had been properly tutored when I first returned from my studies abroad and plunged straight away into attempts to set up acting companies and stage plays. It's embarrassing to have to admit that all we knew at the time, and for years afterwards, could easily be summarized as selling program space. If you're doing a play, for instance, it's a matter of course that you produce a program. Well then, you ensured that you left some space in that brochure for advertisements. We invited the local merchant to advertise, Jellerams, Kingsway stores, Leventis, etc. It took years, decades, to learn with painful sluggishness that there are ways of attracting more durable sponsorship. Lacking any insight into corporate psychology, it never occurred to us to foment and or exploit the rivalry between commodity brands. We were more than content with the mere sale of advertising space on our miserable brochure. Yet even such exploitation of brand rivalry pales in comparison with the potential of what I have learned since reading Never Quite an Insider. Just think of the lucrative returns if we'd taken the trouble to engage the true professional fundraisers that feature in his narrative. Well, fundraisers, thus described, though others, including our author, might prefer to describe them as protection racketeers. I found the Onwukwe model in this work, the very section which you read, closest to my main discipline, which involves acting. Going by the account of that gentleman's modus operandi, we would simply have ensured that the local Keith Richards got a whiff of information that the local Onwukwe was a lover of the arts and a patron of our theatrical efforts. I mean, there are some like that, you know. An accidental meeting with the company manager, maybe at Kakadu or Paradise Club, while a sinister-looking figure lurked in the background, would do the trick. The lavish musical offerings that are fast dominating the nation's theater scene, pioneered, coincidentally, from this very venue, Terra Culture, would have reached audiences much earlier. We would have made the transition from factory soap to soap opera much, much earlier and much more lucratively. At the center of it all, the Onwukwes and a refined version of the Bakassi Boys. Now, the Bakassi Boys, as you heard, were, however, no laughing matter. And their intrusion into Keith Richards' purlieu, albeit even clearly understated, is no stuff for weak stomachs. This work resurrects issues that have long been papered over, precursors to the current malaise that covers the nation like a blood-stained shroud. An outsider's marginal intervention reminds us that some of those politicians and other respectable citizens of affluence and influence today made their beginnings as certified thugs and killers, with the roll call of victims as their sole curriculum vitae. Businesses in such environments were compelled to have built-in protection strategies that are often in themselves none too long on niceties. Between the crude protection rackets and their enforcers, on the one hand, and the white-collar, genteel corruption consortiums, on the other, the dividing line proves very frayed. If a business is hounded into folding up through organized bureaucratic or political corruption, elite cabals, ethnic hustlers, or, on the other hand, from the activities of crude enforcers acting on their own or on behalf of hidden acquisitive interests, it is still the result that counts, and it did count. From time to time, surely, people of my generation must have wondered, where's Partisan Zokonis? Where's Borini Prono? What has become of John Holt, despite its later comeback enfeebled efforts? The once ubiquitous Francophone enterprises such as SCOA. Why is Julius Berger virtually the only man left standing in the road construction business from the 50s and 60s? What has it really taken for that firm to survive till these days while others scrambled? Perhaps someone of my generation will remind me of the correct name of one of yet another construction firm, Italian. When it folded up in the 70s, I think, I bought one of their used Jeeps, a Fiat Campagnola. So domesticated was their signboard at the time that, trust my Yoruba people, they turned the real name to Shinabule, literally covered the ground with withering fire. That version became so deeply etched in my mind that I no longer can recall the real name of that company. I think it was Sole Bone, something like that, yes, okay. And numerous small-scale entrepreneurs with various productive and employment implications, including architects and landscape companies. They did not vanish on account of the Onwukwes. The politicians and the white-collar bureaucrats proved far more efficient terminators. Many folded up and returned home, their tails between their legs. They could not cope with corruption as primary business facilitators. Portions of Keith Richards' experience remind me very much of a book by a business investigator who was hired to probe a death in Burkina Faso. The author of that work was a Brazilian. He near literally crashed through a protection barrier that had been created around me in the city of Minas Gerais in Brazil after 2 days of frustrated efforts. This obsessed man eventually switched to the simple strategy of waiting for me in the hotel cafe, having discovered somehow that I went regularly for my espresso fix first thing early in the morning before other clients arrived. And so he cornered me and presented me with his book. But not just with the book. It was mine, he said, an outright gift also, not the copy, an outright gift of all the intellectual rights contained in that book. And he brought a pre-signed document with him. I was intrigued. The story went thus: he'd been sent to Ouagadougou by an American-based company to find out what happened to the original partner, who in fact had been responsible for bringing them into that country in the first place. That partner brought in government officials, bureaucrats. He did everything the right way, and they, of course, brought in their own partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he kicked. and threatened to expose what they were trying to do. And one day, he vanished. Left his home to go to a meeting, and that was the end of it. That was the last his family saw of him. And so this American company hired this Brazilian investigator to find out what had happened to their partner. Well, he succeeded. Succeeded so well that he actually found out the baobab tree under which he was buried. Of course, when he returned, the problem began. Political considerations, interests, business interests, future, etc., etc. He found that every effort was being made to kill that report. And so when he heard I was in Brazil, he hunted me down and gave me this book. And all he asked was that I should ensure that it was made into a film. He said, I will die content if I just see that event on the screen. If we ever find Keith near a baobab tree, I'm sure he'll be under the shade, not under the ground, nursing a glass of Guinness, you know. A final word of commendation and an inducement to such would-be filmmakers. Keith Richards does not present us with stereotypic type people, just people. A truthful parade of individuals, groups, families, associate consortiums, team workers, as well as the conniving, loyal and disloyal, thieving and principled, self-sacrificing and self-promoting, egotistical, self-retiring, gifted, retarded, some oozing at the pores from overdose of integrity, while others conform to former Prime Minister David Cameron's description, fantastically corrupt. The designation of corruption as uniquely Nigerian, or indeed African phenomenon, has, however, always been a demonstrable fallacy. But Keith Richards contributes to that debunking by taking us through its refined operations in corporate activities. Here is our author's comment on that basically prejudicial categorization by Cameron. I quote, "A corrupt expatriate can make collusion and manipulation even easier and identification even trickier. There's still a general assumption that expatriates are more honest, a major misconception, as my John Holt experience illustrates. We hear a lot, I think that's end of quote, thank you. We hear a lot about whistleblowers these days. Well, this book is one grandfather of all whistleblowing. Indeed, his explosive indictments of his own expatriate colleagues deserve a totally different designation. I've said it, I think ghetto blaster. We talk of some governors, even legislators, blithely cutting away government furniture and fleets of luxury vehicles from assigned quarters, or selling such to themselves and at rock-bottom prices. Well, just follow the careers of some of Richard's colleagues and the abysmal bargain approach to company property as they moved home or transfer, or simply changed residence. Most endearing of all, however, about this book is that he is himself quite candid about his own perceived shortcomings, the road not taken, rational or productive options discarded, avoidable failures incurred, etc., etc. One other book by a businessman actually comes to mind, Dr. Jibuno's own narrative of life in the murky world of business, with the same lament, the loss of developmental opportunities through the exodus of serious-minded business ventures, the abruptly curtailed productive lifespan of enterprises that would have soaked up the swelling army of the unemployed, all thanks to that voracious bugbear, corruption. With books like these, Nigerians had better sit up and take notice and stop saying that it's just Wole Soyinka all over again, talking. Failure to accede to the implicit cautionary of this book and others like it is a nightmare scenario, captured so frighteningly. In the following words, the narrative of Keith's acknowledged most challenging posting, near literally a war zone, which he referred to. This happens to be Aba, but was applicable to many cities at that time of his biographical witnessing. Let me just read that portion again. About the time when I arrived in Aba, the degree of lawlessness that Abians had to contend with had about reached its nadir. As the evening's traffic flow quietened down by as early as 9 p.m., the streets became quiet. You really did not want to be out and about after 9:30 p.m. unless you were able to take a major risk, a risk so great that the police themselves refused to exit their station compounds after that time. This was seriously impacting on business and made traveling to and from the markets difficult. If you read nothing else in this challenging book, be certain not to miss that chapter that so offhandedly lays out the diabolical nexus of business, crime, and corruption. Then, if you do find the courage, visit the famous Ore Junction that links Ondo, Ogun, and Edo states. Speak to the normal denizens of that space. Ask them to describe what that junction was like even as recently as 2 years ago. The vitality, the bustling market and eating concourse of humanity. Its last stop filling station for motorists before plunging eastwards or northwards. Compare then to now. Then ask, what has caused such a deleterious change? What has turned that concourse into a ghost junction, and so rapidly? And I'm speaking of a time long before the daughter of a famous political leader was shot down in cold blood at that very intersection, a comparatively recent event. So this has nothing to do with that high-profile, truly depressing assassination, an event that is still filled with unanswered questions. No, just ask instead, why the market women and men, the commuters, the food sellers, and ragtag mobile trolleys and head-balanced trays of condiments, utensils, and other bric-a-brac have turned their backs on that commercial hive of human activity, left it to ghosts and memories. Then see if you are not prodded into mouthing the words of that iconic singer, Pete Seeger, and his memorable lyrics, "Where are all the flowers gone?" What applies to Ore, of course, goes for 100 such heaving commercial communities all over the nation. The nation is dying slowly, piecemeal. Keith Richards does not, of course, explicitly echo Pete Seeger, nor indeed does my own variation on Seeger's anti-war lament published after the Civil War, entitled "Flowers for My Land." After reading the Richards memoirs, however, you may find yourself involuntarily wondering, as others have done, especially the remaining straggle of intrepid motorists who find themselves still obliged, often for lack of choice, to ply that Shagamu, Benin, Kaduna, Yobe, Maiduguri, and other axes of human motions. Their lament would read, "Where have all the markets gone?" Thank you.
Another round of applause, please, for Professor Soyinka. Thank you very much, sir. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, both of Professor and of Keith, and then I'll open it up to the floor if you guys have any contributions you want to make. Prof, in talking about that book, you spoke of the fact that in many places it mimicked your experiences of Nigeria, and also said it gave you insights that you think would be useful to anybody really seeking to engage corporate Nigeria. So my first question really is, was there anything you read that came as a surprise to you? And this is especially because you yourself, you've written about Nigeria for many years. You, as a writer, you're very observant. You have insights that, most people don't have and which they sort of rely on your books to get. So was there anything that surprised you, that came across as unexpected or new in that book?
Okay. I shall answer this one question. For me, it's the author who should be asked questions today. But all right, I shall answer that.
Thank you, sir.
No, absolutely nothing. As I said, it's something which I could have embarked upon myself, iterating my own experience, paralleled so uncannily by his. Even the episode which he recounted, when this enforcer came and offered him options, is paralleled. Even I had similar episode. In my case, in fact, it was, in this case, it was physical violence. In a kid's case, in my case, it was fetish violence. I had this strange encounter when somebody came to me during preparations of Koja, I think it was Koja, and said he had been, he said his father, his uncle, I beg your pardon, his uncle was a juju man. And his uncle learned that he knew me and that he was himself involved in the preparations of the cultural events for Koja Games. And that people had come to him, that is his uncle, the fetish man, to ask him to put me under, not physically, to nobble me psychically, to render me completely useless. And he said that his uncle would like to meet me and so that we can talk how he can counter or what, whether he should take the brief or not. And I told him, I said, well, your uncle is a professional. I said, so tell him he should exercise his profession, his professional judgment and his skills. And maybe it is an opportunity in a lifetime for him to try out his skills on a writer. The Nobel thing was not involved at the time, so just a writer, simple. And so please tell him I'm not coming to see him, but that he knows my home. He can come and see me, and I will entertain him, and I will show him what I have in my house. And then he can take his decision which side he wants to be on. And that was the last of that. So you can see, the difference is only the actual instrument which was proposed to nobble me and make me to carry the will. So nothing, absolutely nothing surprised me in that book. But what surprised me was his candor. He named names unstintingly. Now, I've never been able to bring myself to do that. I've always had the consideration, I don't want to destroy this person. I just want him to stop. I just want to counter whatever he's doing. I just want to dismiss him, as I did on occasion, and in some cases even made the mistake of rehabilitating him. That was in the road safety. I paid dearly for it. I'm still paying till tomorrow. I'm still having to counter his lies all over the place, all the way back. So this thing, people don't understand when some of us talk about corruption. They think it's just some kind of glancing encounter. No, this has been one life struggle, which has been the demand which has been made on our energy, our psyche, and the sacrifice we made. I see it all captured so marvelously in this book. And so there's nothing surprising, just the candor, the courage of writing it.
And I'll come back to you just very quickly in a short while to talk about that lifelong struggle and what that means in relation to this particular book. But the Prof raised an issue here about your candor. and your willingness to name names and actually put down details that most people would instinctively pull away from doing. Why? Why did you decide that in writing this book you had to go all the way?
Well, I think it was a constant battle all the way along, and trust me, I didn't go all the way.
You held back something.
I did. I had, my lines. I mean, just the story in ABBA, for example. And, I've referred to, there's times you have to, I mean, everybody here is a businessman, and in the book I've said, if your house is burning down and the fire brigade will not come unless you make them a payment, you are going to pay them. And, throughout that career, there's been crises that you're going to have to make some payments. And certainly some of the people in that book, I know, were afraid that I might name the police that we had to pay to come out, or the firemen to come and put out the fire, metaphorically. So there are times that I definitely pulled back. But overall, I think it's, if you're, there's too many of these kind of memoirs, for want of a better word, where people don't. And I think if you're going to try and be honest about it, then you have to say the truth.
Okay, so but in terms of, and because, the damage that corruption is doing to this country is so huge, and we see the decay that has taken place over the years and is continuing to take place, listening to someone like you talk about business people who are sort of forced to do things, you almost present them as victims, almost as if they have no choice in taking the decision to engage with corruption, to pay bribe, and to do the right things. And for people who are sort of looking to fundamentally alter the way things are done in this country, that doesn't seem like a very strong message to send out. It's almost as if, well, there's nothing we can do, and therefore we have to do this.
Well, I think that's a very genuine challenge. I mean, I try to express, for example, I think I specifically said that a lot of the engagement with culture was to avoid having to do that there were other ways than facilitating payments, that, in a lot of times, by spending the time to go to the weddings and funerals, family funerals and naming ceremonies of DGs of the organisations who we had to get who would be the typical ones that would shut down your factory unless you paid something. But by building those relationships, at least I was in a position then to go and see them and achieve our company objectives without making payments. But it is, as someone who loves Nigeria, it's very difficult. You can't write some Panglossian, like, there's government-sponsored videos going out every day about why we should believe in Nigeria, and they love Nigeria. They show part of the Nigeria I love, but there's that darker side too. So unless you write about it truthfully, and I tried to express that it is a constant battle to get that balance. And, I'm not sure I always got it right.
Okay, thank you. Prof, a last question before we go to the audience.
That's the offer.
Just a general thing. I mean, often...
One little one, Prof.
Yeah, I mean, corporate Nigeria tends to generally be shrouded in mystery, unlike, say, political Nigeria. And so most Nigerians are fully aware of some of the dysfunction that takes place in government. And many times, people tout corporate Nigeria as an example of if we could do things the way they do it in the private sector, then, you know, things would get better. And then you get a book like this, which kind of suggests that actually the private sector is as rotten as the public sector, or at least they are sort of two sides of, very similar and two sides of the same coin. And so for people like you that have sort of spent a lifetime, like you said, a lifetime fighting corruption, looking at the decay in the country, what gives us hope? I mean, how are we going to get around these major issues that we are facing as a people?
Why don't we, at this stage, have somebody, this man sitting here who published the book anyway? Let's get
He said he's not answering questions.
I really am.
Just the last one and then
Well, we perhaps need a greater variety of models. I think this is the problem, that we tend to have just a line, you know, a line of an activist, a single activist image, and we need to vary it a lot. For instance, how many people know that within business there are actually some worthy role models, examples, you know, whose conduct in business can serve as a kind of template for other forms of activity, including cultural activities, including teaching, academia. I was at this event very briefly, the Celebration event a couple of days ago. Very briefly, I just appeared there. Unfortunately, I'd left by the time I had to leave early. But I learned later that, you know, there was this BBC sting operation, sex for admission, marks, etc. And I understand that somebody in one of the speeches, yeah,
Professor Oyebode.
Oyebode, yes. I only learned about that later on. I was shocked that somebody in the academic field would try to trivialize an issue of that nature. Now, please understand me. I'm not saying that the accused was guilty or innocent, no. But if what I understand, if it's true, how Professor Oyebode phrased it, how he turned a you were there, yes.
Yes.
A dismissive attitude. I found that appalling. And this does not, for me, set the kind of example we're talking about. It provokes legitimately, understandably, the kind of question that you ask, that where does hope lie? Where do we seek a kind of redemptive, constant value, which we can attribute, let's say, even to a class, a group of people, a profession, not just an individual. So it's very depressing. I agree with you, but I think everybody just have to work things out for themselves. Fortunately, we have global icons. We can reach outside, look at individuals like Nelson Mandela, for instance. Think of late people again, like Julius Nyerere, who also had his faults, who was also a victim of power, which we always, the power syndrome is used in many ways. But at least there are examples like that all over the world in various fields, and people should stop thinking only Nigeria will provide it, because some of us are tired, very exhausted. I've said it again and again, I repeat it. Anybody who's looking towards me to lead any charge will wait for a very long time. You have to provide me not just a wheelchair, but an electric wheelchair, air-conditioned, tear gas-proof, bulletproof, with a portable fridge. And then I'll come with you. Outside of that, please, we also have, among the young generation, some really marvelous individuals. Study them, and when they come out to contest election, no matter on what level, please, for a change, for God's sake, take a chance on some of them and stop recycling the old brigade from whichever side.
Thank you very much, Prof. Okay, we'll take comments and questions. And could you introduce yourself once you get the mic, but please keep it short. I have a reputation for interrupting people. Huh? All right, so hands up, please. Comments, questions? Yes, the gentleman in the T-shirt. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Temitayo Bello, just finished NYSC. Prof has talked about how you went blunt, you mentioned names, and I want to assume these names belong to people, powerful people who don't want to be pursued, don't want to be followed. I just want to know, sir, do you expect consequences? And if you do, how do you plan to tackle them? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll take a few before we come back to you. Yes, ma'am. There's a lady whose hand was up somewhere here. Ma'am? Yes. No, right here in front. Yes. Thank you.
Congratulations, Keith. My name is Tone Williams. I'm a media practitioner. I haven't read the book yet. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm going to ask you to sign it, and then I'll read it. You've been here for, I think, what, 30 years? Well, you were here for 30 years, about that. Did you notice, you never quite an insider, then the predecessor was insider, outsider. Did you notice any change in response to you as an Englishman, a white guy, over the years? Did you notice maybe, yes, any gradual change towards you as a European, non-African, non-Nigerian over the years? You know, in your encounters in corporate Nigeria, in the public service, from the general citizenry. I've always been fascinated to see if there's been a sort of, well, tell me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, the lady in front here. Can we come to this side of the room, please? This way. Look at that way. Okay. Yes. I thought I saw your hand up. No? Oh, okay. Over here. Yes. Thank you.
Congratulations, Keith. You know me, Pamela Watson. I was in Nigeria a similar period to you and have now written my own memoir about my business activities. So I share many of your experiences. What I'm interested in is, I think like you, we share the passion for Nigeria and still are terribly optimistic. So I'd like to hear from you about what gives you optimism about the future and what essential changes you think are required in order to transition and for Nigeria to realize its potential.
Okay, if we come back to you before we go to the floor again. So the three questions.
Okay, excuse me. Let me take this question because I think that's a very interesting one. There's been, yes, there has been a long change, and it works in two ways. The first thing is I've changed. So when I first came to Nigeria, I was just a visitor. I was working for a government-based organisation, and my job was collecting government and parastatal debts to the UK. I hated it. And it's not surprising, right? I was stuck in a hired car and sent around the country, and I had to go to meet state accountant generals and, you know, so I was not enjoying it. No one wanted to see me because I was come to collect money. It was only, I think, then later, when I joined Guinness, which was in 88, and then I would have come about 89, 90, something like that, for my first visits in Guinness. It was very different because it was a social thing, and I started meeting Nigerians in a much more social context. As I relaxed, I found there was a different response. And then when I got that different response back, that encouraged me. And, you know, I see expatriates have been here for many years. I'm sure that have gone through, you go through this journey. It takes a long time too before, you know how to trust and you relax your guard. And then at the same time, Nigerians also get to to you, and you know, it does take a long time, but you know, there are expatriates here who I know are now welcome in Nigerians' homes, but it probably took many years before you get to, and you know, as you gradually get that confidence, I think to...
Let me just stop you a little, just
Yeah.
ask you to clarify. You said you changed,
Yeah.
and then you talked about confidence. Explain to us a little bit more. What was it that changed for you? Was it that as you fell in love with the country, you started to be a little bit more relaxed and receptive? Was it a question of, and this might sound really awkward, but I'll say it anyway, did you come in with certain racist attitudes and did they change? What was it exactly that changed, that made you change?
Well, I think yes to that racist. There was certainly a more us and them, you know. I mean, I tried to talk a little bit about it in the book, but yeah, I think as I relaxed, and it was relaxing socially, but also racially, yes, definitely. The first time you find yourself in a room, you know, where you spend a week where you don't meet any other British people or white people is part of a journey, right? And you know, it is what it is, and it's understanding that process too, which I think is part of your journey as a person, and you hope as you grow. But I think to simply, you learn things like Nigerians are always going to shout at you and make a lot of noise, and after a while you realize instead of responding to that, you just, you know, let it blow over and then respond with humor, and the approach is completely different. When you first come as an expatriate and go through the airport, it is hell on earth. It's terrifying, and it's a lot better now than it was in the 80s. I mean, you know, those of us with grey hair will all remember what a horrible place it was. And I hated it. Now, you know, I know, so that when people ask me, what have they for me? You know, 30 years ago I would have been intimidated. Now, I just smile and say, you know, I have my best wishes for a long and they go, you know, go. And it's a laugh. So it works both ways.
Okay, the question on consequences, and
I
then
think,
what gives
I think
you
that
hope?
was more about the question on the blog, whether there would be more, the ramifications
Yes.
of stealing Prof's name in the blog.
No, it was about the fact that you named names in the book.
Oh, I see.
And whether you're worried about potential consequences from those you've basically named and shamed.
Right, okay, sorry, I didn't quite. Yes, well, I mean, we've sent the book to lawyers. They did tell me to change a few words. There's always a risk. But by and large, I would take the approach that if anybody's going to make fuss, that's more likely to expose them and make more noise than there is if they just sit quietly and maybe send me an abusive email. So, you know, because there is nothing in the book that I can't substantiate. So if anybody wants to tackle that, they've actually got to stand up there, and then I can prove to anybody why I've said what I've said in the book.
Okay, and before you answer her question, just a follow-up to that. It's a pretty detailed book. So I have to assume you have, you know, been either keeping a diary or you've been keeping documents. And so did you always know you were going to write this book?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I've always kept notes, and I've kept a diary with a lot of notes. But then contentious issues like that, I kept papers and documents. And actually, I was quite lucky because you can't find them, you know, usually. And it was actually when I was packing and moving from one place to another in Lagos, I found a file with loads of stuff, and I thought, oh, that is going to be very helpful in the future.
What gives you hope, optimism?
Well, it's just, you know, sometimes you know, particularly when you read the newspapers, you just get despair and you think, you know, in 1981, when I first came, I went to a conference and they were talking about the potential of Nigeria. And we're still talking about the potential of Nigeria. But it's when I speak to younger people, you know, and there are so many good people in Nigeria. And, you know, there's some of the people I've worked with here, and some of them, Vitus, Andrew, I don't know if Kachi's here. We're planning to write, our next book is going to be about how expatriates and Nigerian managers, how we've worked together, because I don't think there's a lot of us and them kind of stuff, you know, and, you know, young managers that I've worked with, that I see going on to run businesses now, that gives me a sense of pride, but it also gives me a sense of hope. And young people in the artistic sphere, you know, the Kuti family are still out there fighting. You know, I'm closer to Seun. He's still out there agitating. Even young people, there's young Ope, the musician who was playing there, outstanding young musicians. And we have to get behind these young Nigerians. And as Prof said, you know, we have to find a way and support them and get behind them and give them some kind of platform to take that youth and, you know, get rid of, or at least let us old babas sit under the shade of the baobab tree without being buried under it, Prof, and drink our palm wine.
Thank you very much. Any more questions and comments from the floor? Yes, sir. Please, can you take the mic here? Yes.
Good afternoon, Keith.
Uncle Sumi, how are you, sir?
When Bankole called me to say he was launching a book, I didn't know it was you. And when I got here, I didn't recognize you. I had to ask them. So who's the guy? He said, Keith Richards.
Sir, please use your mic. Yes.
Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you today. You are a lucky man. Forget about your book. The fact that Prof agreed to review your book, what did you give him? And now your publisher is trying to look like Prof. When he published my first book, he was a young man, dapper, and all now. When I talked to him on the phone, I had a video call with him. I told him to come for a haircut this week when he comes here. But I am so happy to see you. I congratulate you. I am actually trying to imagine what you went through. I saw the voluminous book outside, the paperback. I'm trying to produce my memoirs now. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been going to bed like 7 o'clock in the morning and all that. So I know what it means. I hail you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Sumi.
Thank you.
You know, I do know how lucky I am. I cannot believe. So Bankole sent Prof the book just to write a little blurb, and Prof said that he enjoyed it, and so trust me, you do not know, I was terrified to be on the same stage. He said he was going to roast me. You cannot comprehend how much pleasure it gives me that I'm able, but I do bribe him sometimes because I know his predilection for a fine wine, and then that way I get to share it with him and Bankole as well.
Yes,
Hi,
sir.
Keith. Hi, Keith. You did mention Seun Kuti, and I noticed a lot of photos of both of you flashing in the background. I just wanted to, just intrigued to know how your friendship started, and how is it possible to, not so many people of my generation are cool friends with people of your generation. How did the friendship develop over the years? Thank you.
There's a lady at the back, yes.
Good afternoon, Keith. I'm Sunday Oyebamiji, a master's student at University of Lagos. From the perspective of literature, I'd like to ask, is this book an hybrid or probably an African literature text or maybe a British literature text? Where is it found in these books? I'm confused here, so.
Thank you. Anyone else before we come back to Keith? No? Okay.
Well, just to take that one, yeah, I think the book is a hybrid. I mean, people have said to me, who are you writing for? You should think about who you're writing for. But, you know, if I did that, I was confused. So I guess and people have said it should be available for people doing MBAs. But I think...
What is your hope for the book?
I think that Nigerians find it both amusing and challenging, but I think that expatriates can use it if you're studying business in Nigeria or looking to come to Nigeria, particularly the elements that talk about engaging. And I hope that's the theme, is the importance of engaging, both in a professional and a personal sense.
Okay, and before you go to the second question, because you've talked about expatriates, I'd like to just quickly ask the Prof a quick question. In your review, sorry, sir. In your review, you described the expat as a creature and also a species. And there's an otherness in the way you sort of refer to them. And I'm just wondering, in the context of this book and also your experience of foreigners who come to work here, are they a necessary evil? Do we need expatriates in Nigeria? And if so, what sort of expatriate? Is it the Keith Richards type of expatriate, or should we be ready to accept everybody, really? So as locals, do we need to sort of redefine our relationships with expatriates?
I'm on strike.
Okay, Keith. Go on. We'll come back to Prof.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, not just because of the friendship with Shell, but the point is, if people like you aren't able to be building relationships with older people, that's a failure. Not of you, but of older Nigerians not being available to support and mentor you, because that's important. Although, as I see it, often it works both ways. I have a huge pleasure to sit at the feet of people like Prof. I can see Uncle Theo there, and another Prof, that I get so much pleasure, and I learn from sitting and listening. Not enough young Nigerians are ready to sit and listen, but also older Nigerians need to make themselves available for that. You know, if you're going to bridge that gap, I think more of that needs to happen. So with Sharon, it's very simple. I had a birthday party in London when at my 50th. Sharon was studying music in Liverpool, and a mutual friend brought him down to the party. Now, this was in a pub, and those of you who will remember the old British licensing laws, pubs then, you could get a late license till 12, and of course, Sharon, being Nigerian, turned up at 10 to 12, and the party was finishing, so I had to get him something to drink. He hadn't arranged anywhere to stay. I had to find him somewhere to stay, but you know, we sat and chatted and got to know ourselves. When he came back to Nigeria, he looked me up. And I think, to be fair to Seun, obviously he lost his father very young. He took on this burden. At 14, he was leading, Fella's band, Egypt 80. He was under pressure from a very early age. And I think, everyone was looking for him for money, for jobs, and I think he just found coming round my house to watch football, or I had at that time a lot of old music DVDs, and he's a professional musician. He was happy to sit and listen to jazz and classical music, And, we kind of just built that friendship and grew up over time. But I think it's important. And who's benefited most from all of these relationships? It's me. Because I've had... So then, when I was at Guinness and Promasidor, these relationships give me insights. So it's good it enables you to do your job and better, as well as being rich and rewarding, and you can make friends. So Kate and I have been friends for years. I knew her former husband, and we stayed friends. And then, Kate's someone else whose professionalism is such that encourages me. Kadaria, what she's trying to do, what she tried to do with Next. We have to support young Nigerians who are doing things. And so I've enjoyed building those relationships, and if I can add back, then that's better.
Thank you. Okay. A few more, and then we'll round up. Yes, sir.
Afternoon, Yinka Kinkugwe. Keith, well, congratulations. But my question is very simple. What did you find more challenging? Corrupt individuals or a corrupting environment? Because I have started to believe that one of the reasons we're not grappling the snake of corruption is because we fail to recognize that a corrupting environment is actually more dangerous and more debilitating for us than simply identifying corrupt individuals. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Keith, you can deal with that. There's no one else.
I think do I see much of a differentiation? I mean, if I just narrow it down to what I did in a business, so in all those businesses and, in Promasidor, when I joined Promasidor as well, I found good people and not so good people, individuals. And often it's the not so good people that seem to define the environment around them. So the first thing I did, and I talk about it in John Holt and Guinness particularly, was to get rid of those bad apples. And then if you do that and you replace them with... So in Promasidor, we had to get rid of some bad apples. And then we brought in some good people, and we created an environment where... So then we tried our best with my Nigerian management team to, for example, I can think of examples where we were being harassed. But because of the quality of my Nigerians, we would go and see as much as we could, go and see those DGs and, suffer their abuse, but not then have to go and just pay, but to engage with them and persuade them that we were trying to do the right thing. And a lot of that time we were successful. I think it's right, Andrew. And if you create that reputation that you're someone who wants to do things properly, and you don't create the excuses that they can use, then... So I think it's about identifying good people, getting rid of the bad people. If someone is very, very clever but he's corrupt, get rid of him. Because if he's a bad person, and corruption takes many forms, if he's just abusing his staff, then get rid of him, because you won't build an environment if we're talking about a workplace environment, you won't build a team. If you have people, even if he's the most brilliant technical guy or finance guy, but he's a bully, the fact that you keep him in your management team means that organization knows that you're not tackling that environment. So you have to get rid of that person, because otherwise you can't change that environment.
Okay. 2 last questions. The gentleman in blue and the lady in yellow, and then we'll wrap it up.
My name is Abdul Oro, and I've been a journalist, and I'm also a politician. I've been working on something, and Bankole is aware. And in the course of doing my research, I stumbled on something like what you just related about Abba. There was, I don't know whether to call him a businessman of those days, more like a pirate, working with the Royal Niger Company. Visited a place called Abo now in Delta State. He was trying to set the price of palm oil and also to prevent the people of Abo, at least Kuala area of Delta State, from selling palm oil to other companies. But the chief resisted, the king of the community resisted. He sent a message to him that he should remember that he's dealing with a white man. And the king replied, tell the white man that a white man died here before. So we are going to do this or no business. That is from Munro Ltd's book on Nigeria history. Is it a British thing to want to use color, to want to have your way, or to get yourself out of danger? That's my question.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am. There's a lady behind here by your side, yeah. Just, yes.
Hi, Kadi. I'm Professor. Hi, Keith. They're friends of mine, Keith and Kadaria. And to the publisher, I say a big hello. Well, mine is a build-up on what he's just said. I didn't know he was going to ask a question based on, should I say race? So I have often been tortured with the fact that I think that our parents were made to build their lives around the belief that colonization was positive. I will call it positive colonization. They were brainwashed. That is the generation of my parents. They were brainwashed into thinking that a lot of the aspects of colonization was positive for Africa. Now, coming to our generation, I'm going to ask you a question after I make my statement. Our generation challenges this. In fact, I'm sure if you ask a lot of people who belong to my generation, they would tell you there was nothing positive about colonization, despite the technology they brought and the other aspects of it. You know. I think the next generation, there's going to be a clash, a real challenge with the Occidental, that's the Western nations, the people who brought colonization to us. You know, there's going to be a real force that may be either positive or negative for Africa. You know, because I don't think that since we're using white man, black man in this forum, then permit me to use the phrase white man. I do not think the white man really wants Africa to evolve. What do you think, sir?
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, maybe you can answer this also, obviously, in the context of the rise of the far right across Europe, in the United States, and the push against diversity that we have seen growing among, if you like, the developed countries.
Yeah. Clearly, it's a huge issue. I mean, I'll state very simply that you know, colonialism was completely built on a lie, and the destruction of not just in Africa, but you know, of cultures, histories, of local industries was an abomination. There's just no other world about it. And but it's interesting, this book the bit in the book, I wondered about reading it. I thought about it when I put it in the book, but I wondered about reading it now, because clearly that paragraph written on his own can appear to be completely racist. So I saw Oti come in. It was your favourite bit, mate. You missed it. Yeah, I read your favourite bit about stepping over a white man's dead body. So, yes, I guess it could be. It's meant to be from the point of black magic, from juju, and the use, Bakassi clearly use magic and juju, and that's why you quote the Igbo phrase, Beke na Wabra. And clearly it could be, and it was something that came up. It is a constant issue, and it should be an issue where I would say racism is built on coercion. And there, I mean, it's, to go into that, it's been a journey. I would say that I changed, even after I've retired, I learned more. I've learnt more going back to the UK because of the rise in xenophobia and racism in the UK. I am absolutely appalled and disgusted with the increase in racism that's going on in the UK, and that reflects a global trend. We see it in America with Trump, and as a British man, I'm appalled. Friends of mine of colour have been treated, have had comments made to them that was, you know, I thought we were moving on, and clearly the fact that we have a Prime Minister in Britain that uses terms like, you know, letterbox for hijabs and the comments that he's made, and that the BBC allow an open platform for racists like Farage, and yet when one young journalist, BBC journalist of colour, makes what is absolutely a true statement about Trump being a racist, then the BBC try to dismiss her. I find this abhorrent, and it is extremely challenging, and it also makes me think about how I should respond to that, and how far I have been and continue to be racist in some form. Because I think, and in saying that there's an element of it in everybody, is not to condone it in myself. So I think it's a very important point, and you know, I try to just be as honest as I can, but it's not an easy subject. And I would put myself in the category of learning and trying to understand it better.
Thank
you. There is some movement. We're in the middle of Black History Month in the UK. Ed chaired a symposium with people. It was referred to in the celebration thing, and I think it's very important in the UK that we do try to improve history in the UK of black people of colour in the UK, the connection to their history, and it clearly here too, we need, and you know, the Nigerian education system also needs to be better at having a better curriculum for understanding history and culture, because if you've had that erased, then that erasure is part of what meant that your previous generations were meant to believe that they should say thanks for colonization, because their own cultures and history and, were erased. And I've just read a book on India. Sorry if I'm going on about it, but it's a big... When the British went to India, India was responsible for 27% of the world's GDP. In 1947, when the British ordained to give independence back to Greater India, India was responsible for 3% of the world's GDP. So in the simplest of terms, they shifted 24%. I know it's more complicated than that, but clearly the return of value. The Indian steel, when the British got there, when Clive of India was there, Indian steel was far superior to British steel, so much so that British soldiers threw away their swords and used Indian swords because they were better than theirs. But when the British took over, they banned the manufacture of Indian steel so that they could import. And so Indian industries were forced to import steel from the UK to India. Shahpur's book, I don't know if you read it, Suresh, fascinating. So we have to be better at publicising and understanding the history of what it's meant to understand what the current situation is. So I've gone on a bit about that, but clearly it is an issue, in my book.
Thank you very much, Keith. Okay, so thank you. We're going to wrap it, and I'd like to end by asking the professor, and then I'll come to you for your sort of final remarks. Prof, your final remarks on this book, and perhaps we could end it with you where you started, with the issue of identity theft and what is going on with fake news. It seems to be a subject dear to your heart. It is an excuse as well that government has used to come down hard on people who are critical of them, especially on social media, because it's not as regulated as traditional media. And so what would be your solution to sort of dealing with that without making it an excuse for a dictatorial government to muzzle dissent?
All right. I've had a secret communication with my trade union of geriatrics, and they've given me permission to answer this one. Hey, where did they find you? Yeah, it is a subject about which I feel very, very strongly. First of all, I believe that human beings are entitled to at least one basic right. That's aside from life. We all take that for granted. Otherwise, we won't be talking about human beings. So outside life, I think the next thing is the right to your own identity. Yeah, that doesn't require money, doesn't require religious affiliation, ethnic affiliation, or whatever. But that right to your basic human identity is, to me, the next property, inalienable. That should never be taken from any human being, however high or low. And therefore, I find it, those who indulge in this, I find them below subhuman. I don't consider them human beings any longer. And I believe they should be dealt with the utmost rigor of the law where applicable, and even outside the law by individuals who feel that the law has failed in protecting that fundamental human right. I think the expression crime passionnel should be extended beyond emotional entanglement between the sexes which lead to violence. I think the crime passionnel should be increased, should be recognized as covering also issues like identity theft and identity abuse. I was in Athens just a week and a half ago, the Athens, it's an annual forum on democracy. And this issue was actually tabled at one of the panels, because everybody recognizes the fact that democracy is not possible. It's just meaningless without this sacrosanctity of individuals and identity. If, for instance, at election time, you have statements being made on your behalf, as happened now, I think both the last two elections, this criminality has been very prevalent, which you find statements being made boxed over your name with your photograph to lend fake authenticity to that statement, and you are depriving me of my democratic rights. So why then should I even attempt to express my political identity at the polls? If you've already stolen my identity, corrupted it, assigned a position to me, then you're depriving me of my voice. And so what's the point of my fighting dictators like Abacha, who don't believe in democracy in the first place? What's the difference between you, who steal my identity, and Abacha, who refuses to recognize, in fact, any entitlement to democratic identity? For me, I even prefer Abacha. At least I know that's straightforward. I know what he's up to. But here's somebody sitting behind a computer somewhere, attributing positions to me. You depriving me of my democratic rights. It's as fundamental as that. And it's an issue which I think is being gradually recognized increasingly by governments and, as I said, by organizations like this Democracy Forum. But drastic action and rapid action needs to be taken. Otherwise, Third World War will be started by fake news. Can relate to an event, can relate to an organization, can relate to a nation, can relate to individuals, but fake news really is one of the most dangerous foundation blocks of, for me, hostility and even the possibility of a world war.
Thank you very much, Professor Soyinka. Thank you. And Keith, to end, if you could talk to us again, like I said, a little bit about perhaps what your hopes are for the book, but also what you hope it will do. And before you sort of get to that, perhaps a little bit about the identity issue that the Prof was talking about, because of course, the denial of identity is one way in which racist white people are dealt with Africans. One of the ways they stripped them of who they are and what they are. And I'm just wondering, with expatriates, I've also come across people who see us as one, if you see what I mean. When they come to Nigeria and settle into Nigeria, they kind of tend to deal with us as if we are, they don't see us. That's what I mean. They don't really see us. Our identity is a mixture of stereotypes and expectations. And I suspect that colors the way that they deal with us. So based on sort of your journey, the advice in this book, for those who haven't read it yet, could you sort of summarize it succinctly for the expatriate coming to do business in Nigeria? And then round it all up for us, please. Thank you.
How many hours have I got to do all that? No, I think identity is critical, and without trying to be a psychologist, the damage done by the destruction of identity, clearly, of cultures across the world by colonizing powers, whether it's in, indigenous peoples in Australia or North America, South America, and everywhere. And if you destroy people's identities, then you destroy the roots. And I genuinely believe that so much of the disturbance comes about because people's identities everywhere have been destroyed. And I think it's important that, and I think as that flows, so moving into the book, I think I hope one of the themes that comes out clearly that expatriates who come here to manage a business should understand, if you don't engage with the individual and collective cultures and identities, how the hell can you expect to manage them effectively and reach engagement? And if you can't, how are you going to be an effective manager if you don't do that? As well as on a personal level, how can you enjoy, and the problem is, and this is what comes out, the pressure, increasing pressure for short-termism. And this is what I felt at Guinness in Diageo, because they wanted me to make short-term decisions, which I knew were inimical to the long-term interests of local shareholders. And too often now, international companies send people for 2 years or 3 years, and they're not ready to make that engagement, and they don't put that effort. Because, if I look around, people like John and Roger that have been here for many more years than me could equally write books about engagement. It's just I'm the one that I've got the bigger ego probably. But there are fewer and fewer, and the faces are getting older and older, because the guys that run Guinness, Heineken, Nestle, Unilever, we just name all that, they come for 2 or 3 years and then they bugger off. And that is, you can't build long-term businesses with a short-term perspective. And that also means you need to engage and reflect. And it works in so many ways. Prof talked about marketing. Now, in the old days, we built marketing campaigns here about local people. Now they're dictated to by global marketing groups who might have a little office, but their adverts are not shot in Nigeria anymore. They're just generic. I don't know if I put it in the book. Very early on in Guinness, there was a West African generic advert that completely failed in Nigeria and succeeded in Ghana. And we couldn't understand why. It was, some of the older people here, my age, will remember the one with the guy with the javelin, the Guinness, and it was all about underarm hair and where it was considered acceptable and where it was not acceptable. And that's the sort of thing, if you don't understand local cultures, you can't even do your job properly, let alone engage. And so one of the things that I hope comes out is the importance of engaging, both for the personal journey and professional, which is why it should be a business book as well as just a memoir.
Chief Keith Richards and Professor Prof Soyinka. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Wow. A lovely afternoon indeed. Well, we're into the afternoon and we're rounding up. So the book is, paperback is 7,500 naira only, and the hardback copy is 10,000 naira. I'm sure we all here who have listened to excerpts from the book, heard the review from Prof, listened to the conversations with Kadaria, know or have an idea what to expect from the book. I've seen a few people with the bags. I expect everyone in here to have a copy of the book and also get it for someone. Christmas is around the corner. It will be an exciting read. So next I'd like to call on Keith to please come and give us his vote of thanks. Call Vitus. I've seen Andrew. Yes, there you are. As co-authors of his next book. And then he'll be signing, please don't leave. He'll be signing the book, so, an autograph worth keeping from the author himself. Chief Keith Richards, OB, a.k.a. Ghetto Plaster. Round of applause.
Thank you very much, Kate. Well, I could take a very long time in giving thanks, but I'll just start with thanking everybody that's up here. And, you know, first of all, I've surrounded myself with strong women, so Kate and Kadaria. Thank you to both of you. And obviously, in particular, thanks very much, Prof. It's indeed a huge honour. And even our errant publisher, as we like to call him, thank you very much. I would like to thank some people that have supported very directly. I think, did I see Laddie come in? I'd like to thank Laddie and FCMB who have supported. Vitus, Andrew, Kachi, thank you guys. Anders, Promasidor, thanks very much. I think UAC have donated some soft drinks. I think we've had some discounts from my friend Brian and Paul's Company for Wine. I don't think I've forgotten any of the other sponsors, but very grateful because Koko, who's around somewhere, who organised this event, did a fantastic job. I was really, really impressed at what a good job she's done. So I'd like to say, Koko, thank you. But more than that, I'd just like to thank everybody because I think I know most of the people here. And, you know, over the years I've been here, I've had so much warmth and generosity. I've had fun. I've had tears. I've had tears of joy, tears of anger, frustration. But above everything else, I've just had a great time and had a lot of laughs. I intend to have drink a few more glasses of Guinness, because although I'm not there, I keep telling everybody it's my pension scheme. I'm not going to support anybody else's pension scheme. So I hope I'll be ready to sign books and have a glass of wine and hopefully see you again soon. So thanks for coming, and I wish you all Jersey mercies. Thanks very much.
Thank you to all of you. I'd just like to say, true riches are people, not money. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon. Have a lovely, lovely day, and God bless all of you. Uncle Aswe, I see you. Thank you. Uncle Sumi. Please get a copy of the book, please. Just $7.5. Paperback, hardback, 10,000. Gift it to somebody. Let them have the same experience you're having. Don't go anywhere. Keith, you have to sign. Koko, where's the table? Keith will be signing if you already have a book. If you already have a book, please give it to him to sign.